once you have a fear that you might be wrong, but you have still the audaciousness and courage to go forward, you're a lot smarter than the person who thinks they know. There's a quote that Jefferson said, "He who knows he knows not is closer to the truth than he whose mind is filled with falsehoods." And so when you know that, and then with your character and your determination, you go forward. The smartest people I know are the most humble. The more you learn, the more you realize, oh, I'm eager to take in. So that's right. And I would say that there are many people in your audience who can plan for a simple lifestyle that can be wonderful. Sometimes we acquire these needs that aren't anywhere near as big as we make them out to be. Do you have a bed to sleep in? Do you have food to eat? Do you have basic health care? Okay, if you start to think, okay, what are my needs that I really need and I'm okay? And how can I make provisions for those needs? Then once you've got that in your mind, you're free.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because in my first business, I was making $300 a month. I quit on my business partner, and the thing that saved me was studying the stories of super successful entrepreneurs. So I hope that this story today helps give you the motivation you need, because I still need it too myself. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Ray Dalio, and my take on his top 10 rules of success. Enjoy.
You can go beyond that. You may say, listen, I can do that for a year or 2 years or a month or whatever. But I think we visualize too much the things that we're used to. One of the good things about this exercise is that it brings you back to basics. You can be brought to basics. And like I'm saying, if you have a bed to sleep in and you've got food and so on, and you have those basics and good relationships with people who care about you and basic health care. So if you budget for that and you figure, how do you have it? Maybe it isn't in the luxurious place you're in. Maybe it's in the country and so on. Once you visualize that and you get that down in your head and you say, I can get that, then your stress will disappear, because as you visualize that, in many ways, that's a happy life. It doesn't take a lot. There's stimulation, there's nature, there's relationships. These fundamental, wonderful things, the most important things, can be obtained. And so for many of you, I think if you look at that and you budget for that, I'm seeing a number of people who are going broke. And I've watched this over many years. And really, it's just the adjustment process. Once they get to that point where, they get settled, they're fine. It's the ambiguity, it's the worry, it's the stress. So if you do that from the beginning and you have that played out in your head, then everything from there you can play with, and it's icing on the cake. So I want to emphasize, you can budget for that. You can look at that, find that scenario, find what that looks like so that you've got it down. Then you're safe. Once you've got safe, everything beyond that is luxury.
Rule number 2, practice meditation.
Whatever success I've had has come more from meditation than any other thing, any other influence. And you and I know, because you're a meditator, your wife's a meditator. We meditated in your room, your meditation room. We know what it is, and I'll explain what it is. I'll first explain what it gives you, and then I'll explain how it gives it to you. It gives you an equanimity, a ability to almost rise above yourself and to see things in this thoughtful way, almost like a ninja in a ninja movie. As things are coming at them, everything sort of seems slower, and you approach it and you can deal with it in that way. And it gives you a greater level of creativity. And it does that by connecting your subconscious to your conscious. it achieves that by repeating a mantra. So here's how it works. There's a sound that doesn't have a meaning. It's a sound. We could, for example, it could be something like Om, and mentally you repeat that over and over again. You close your eyes, you get in a comfortable position, and you repeat that. And you'll find that your mind will go to that, but then it'll go to thoughts, and you just say, oh, it's in thoughts, and you go back to Om, and you get to practice it. And after a while, you'll stay in that meditation, that mantra. And then when you're in that mantra, it will then disappear. And then you go into a transcendent state. In other words, you transcend and you're going basically into your subconscious. And you're in your subconscious. And your subconscious is really what controls you more than your conscious. It's just, you're just not conscious of it. Because when you're conscious, you think, oh, well, what do I want to do? And so on. But your subconscious has such an influence of the things you've learned in your earlier years or your genetics or something, and they're not aware from you. And when you go down into that, you get relief, but you also help to make the connection between your subconscious and your conscious. And so when they're aligned, you're aligning your emotional decisions with your intellectual decisions. So I find it's an instinctual thing for me to do. What do I feel emotionally? What do I feel? What do I think about that intellectually? And then how do I approach that in that calm way? It doesn't diminish your emotions. It just is, you feel them differently. And my love is as much as it has ever been, or more maybe, because I feel it differently. So I just want to emphasize, it doesn't take away your emotions or anything. It just puts them in the perspective as though, and you look above yourself and you see yourself within the life's arc. You see the strengths and the weaknesses and how to deal with them, and you navigate better.
Rule number 3, stop getting stuck.
The greatest problem of mankind, I believe, wow, that's a big statement, the greatest problem of mankind, and it is an exceptional problem at this moment in time, is people having opinions that they're stuck on that they won't, like I have to have my opinion, and that's right, and so on, because it prevents them from resolving it, from moving forward, to finding the best answer, from compromising or doing, So like everybody's arguing over everything, and they, they're it's almost like they're killing each other. And we're in a society, I have another principle, which is when the causes that you're behind are more important to you and others than the system is in jeopardy. So are you just literally going to go fight? So here we are, as we think, will we fight, or will we have protocols for having thoughtful disagreements and getting past them?
Rule number 4, evolve well.
I'm 72 years old. I know where I am in my arc in life. The country has been a tremendous blessing. I've lived the American dream. I know what it's like, and I know what my role is at 72 years old. And
what is that?
Is to pass along whatever I have that's of value to others. Okay? So I think the most important things that I have are these principles that I wrote down that work for me. I put them out. You take them or leave it. Everybody, I'm here. I say what I want. People take it or leave it. And then, so my goal is to evolve well and to contribute to evolution. I think that's the natural thing. So at this particular point, that's what I'm trying to do.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, find your pull.
Do you have a pull? Okay, what's your pull? So it's all in questions, I think. It's all in a journey. Life is in a journey, an adventure. That's what I'm trying to say in principles for success. Or you can get, by the way, principles, if any of these principles are also Principles in Action is an app that's available on the iStore, and it's free. And it has all of these things in it, but because we'll separate. I think people might like that. But have to know your pull, and then along the way, you're going to have your adventure, and you're going to learn, and then you go through your phases of life. And each phase is different. Like you talked about your phase. You're in the middle of your phase in life. You talked about your wife and your relationship with her. Okay? That is a phase of life. And when you go, and by putting it in perspective, it's helpful. In the back of that book, Principles for Success, there's a life arc chart. And if you know where you are on that life arc, and you know what the next 10 years is typically like, and you know what the people you care about are on their life arcs, you can almost know what's coming at you, and then you could start to think about it. So it's at that level of knowing yourself and knowing how these things happen over and over again that you can achieve your path. Don't be surprised. Most life is the same things that happen over and over again. You're born. You probably have parents to take care of you. Maybe you have one, maybe you have two, but somebody does. They teach you. You have your first phase of your life where you're dependent on them and you're learning. Then you come out to your second phase of your life, and then you're working and others are dependent on you, and then you have that. So these things happen over and over again, and you just have to know that path and know how to approach it.
Rule number 6, venture into the jungle.
How have you celebrated and embraced successes in your life too? We just spoke about failure. I'm intrigued to know how someone like yourself deals with success.
Well, I think my thinking about success has evolved over a period of time. I thought about success. I today think about success differently. It's like the way I thought about it originally when you have this failure. I thought that it's like there's a jungle out there. I want to have the greatest life possible, but in order to be successful, I have to cross this dangerous jungle. Now, I could stay on the one side of the jungle and have a boring, safe life, but unless I deal with the risks and return go together, and it's like going into this jungle. So what would I choose? Would I choose to go into the jungle and cross the jungle and have the greatest life possible, but I might get bad things might happen? And then I started to think when I went into that jungle, of course I had to cross the jungle, but I started to realize how to cross the jungle, most importantly with people who could see things differently than I could on the mission with me. And so, and we would protect each other in that jungle. And that's what it was like. So life is a lot like that. Who are you in the jungle with? And they might see things differently from you. And then you protect each other and you go through. And the thing that I discovered was that as I had these successes and failures, and much more successes than failures, I began to realize that I didn't care as much about the success as I cared about the journey. Okay. In other words, I didn't want to get out of the jungle. I didn't want to get to the other side. Because it might be like, I don't know, climbing mountains or doing whatever you realize. There's a new peak and there's a new level of success, and it won't keep you happy. Okay. You don't sit there. You want to go on.
Yes.
And it is the ups and downs of that journey and the striving into becoming better that becomes the new definition of success. And so I started to see my life in this life arc way, with my preferences changing, because your preferences naturally change as one has kids and as they start to think. I mean, everybody that you're dealing with is going through a life arc. If you think about who are the people you love, what is your relationship with your parents? What are your relationships? Do you have children? They will have a life arc. And as you go through that life arc and you see those things changing, then you start to realize that operating consistent with that life arc and on that journey to evolve well, is what success is. It's not the money. It's like money loses its marginal utility very quickly, right? If you studies of happiness, there's a Harvard professor, many professors, I suppose, and they tell you the same thing in terms of studying happiness around the world. There's very little correlation between how much money you have and the level of happiness past the basic subsistence level. The element that there's the highest correlation with is an element of community, who you're with. So it's this meaningful work. Are you on a mission and meaningful relationships through a life arc that evolves? So that's my definition of success is more like evolving well and contributing to evolution.
Rule number 7, get inspiration.
I admire so many people. I think one of the problems we have today is we don't have heroes. We don't have role models and heroes because so many people are interested in tearing down people.
Yeah. I don't know how we got to that, but it's true. I think the internet helped and social media helped.
We need more. There are so many great people, role models who could be role models. And I think of just so many in my lifetime that I've seen.
Rule number 8, seek good advice.
Let me just, on the thing, yes, it's the looping and learning from mistakes, but another part of it is the realization that you don't have to make your decisions in your own head. Okay? That when you start to realize that you know what you're good at and what you're bad at, that a power comes to you when you start to know, okay, who's the best person to give me the advice, or who's the best person to lead me through this, or when you start to know that you can go beyond what you think and your opinionatedness so that you can triangulate. I call it triangulate with others so that you find 3 people who are really capable of giving you good advice, who will argue with each other and argue with you so you can see all sides of it and you work yourself through. So it's not just your eyes looking for the path, but it's other people's eyes looking with the path with you, knowing that you're going to have successes and failures. But that power of that collective learning and triangulate well with humbleness is a great power as you go through that cycle.
Rule number 9, practice radical truthfulness.
I mentioned that you believe in the Socratic dialogue and also sort of radical transparency, which is the stress testing of.
Yeah, the culture of Bridgewater that I learned from these experiences is, I'll say it in one sentence, an idea meritocracy in which the goals are meaningful work and meaningful relationships through radical truthfulness and radical transparency. So I want the best ideas to win out. That's the idea of meritocracy, wherever they come from. I believe in meaningful work and meaningful relationships reinforcing each other, that they're the greatest reward. And if you have that together, then you're going to be more successful. If you're on a mission, that's the work you're on, then you're on a mission together and you have that tight relationship. That's a great power, but it's through that mutual generosity and caring. And that you have to do that through radical truthfulness and radical transparency. Radical truthfulness, I mean, first of all, you got to find out what's true. It's the foundation of anything. So you have to be able to talk about anything and get to truth. Truth might be what your weaknesses are as well as what your successes are. So it has that truthfulness and that idea meritocracy to figure it out and do it together. Those are very powerful things. Yes, I learned that.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is help others.
The issues that we're dealing with, like one of the things that we're trying to do, my wife does this 6 days a week, is in various ways try to get programs and things that get high school kids and 8th and 9th grade to get them through high school and into work in the state of Connecticut. Okay. I'll give you a statistic. The state of Connecticut is one of the richest states on average, but has a big wealth gap. 22% of the high school students are either disengaged or disconnected. Disengaged means the absentee rate is greater than 25% and they're failing classes. And disconnected means that they don't know where they are because they've dropped out of school. In other words, more than 1 in 5 students, high school is failing. And so, and they're failing high school. And the budget issues are a problem. I live in Greenwich, Connecticut, and it's a rich town. The average per student for public high school is $24,000. You go up the hill and 15 minutes away, and it's Bridgewater, Connecticut. It's a poor town, and it's $14,000 a student. They need more money because there's hunger, there's bad conditions. They need more money than Greenwich, Connecticut, and yet they're getting significantly less. So what's the natural consequence of that? The parents who are raised under these very impossible, the kids become parents, and they're raised under these circumstances. And what is their community and what is their income? Their community is the gangs, because that's their community. That's the one they can relate to. And everybody needs a community. And what are their income? It's crime in one form or another. And there are gangs and shootings all the time. And we're in a situation where, of course, that creates not only the crime costs, but it also creates high incarceration costs. The state pays $600 million a year for incarceration. So you create a cycle. In order to break that cycle, you need everything from early childhood education all the way through that. Yeah, and that has to make an improvement. Yeah, and that's why I say you might even need reforms to the Constitution, because the state education is a state issue. And in the states, they tend to make it a tax district issue. And so there's no way that you're going to get that. Now, the cost of that bad education is immense for the country because not only is it unfair, but also you don't know where the talent is going to come from. Throughout history, you find that the most talented people can come from anywhere. And there's only basic things you need to have. What I had when I was growing up, I was very lucky. I had 2 parents who cared for me. They were good guidance. I went to a public school, and I came out to a country of equal opportunity. So I could work hard, and that was it. And we need to, I think, in one way or another, establish that there's a bottom that nobody can go below, and to realize that those are good investments. The same is true for infrastructure. There's no inadequate infrastructure. My generation has given the next generation a lot of debt, a broken down education system, and a broken down infrastructure. So that's going to require a lot. So my general reaction is philanthropy is woefully inadequate. To give the knowledge, teach a man how to fish is better than to give him a fish. I mean, I think you can give them both. You can give education and you can, but ability, the capacity to be productive, because, you know, if I can give you the capacity to go out in the world, it's like go into a jungle. I give you a knife and can you live in the jungle? Okay. If I give you that capacity, that's the best thing I can give you. That's why I wrote the book and, you know, pass it along. I wrote those principles over years and I wrote them down, and that's what I want to pass along. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But if you've got money, you can help people a lot in a lot of different ways, which is thrilling.
What would you say then are the 3 greatest skills that people that aren't financially abundant or that are struggling financially should learn to master in order to be in a better position financially? 3 skills, what would you say they should learn?
Well, as I said before, I remember watching the movie, I was young, David Copperfield with W.C. Fields, and he speaks to David Copperfield, and he said something like, and I'll put it in dollar terms, you're at $100, and you spend $105, that's misery. If you earn $100 and you spend $95, you'll have a good life. I mean, it wasn't exactly like that, but it was, but basically, I know so many people who don't earn much, but are there. Because if you start to think about what it is that it costs you to live in terms of, let's say, the basics, give me a bed to sleep in, give me the food, let me be educated, and so on and so forth. I think most people can get themselves in a position where, they're net positive. Mm-hmm. So if you can be net positive and you could do that, that's number one, as I carry that. So that's number one. Then I guess it was the list that we went to. The second is, what do you do next in terms of what do you need? What do you invest in? Mm-hmm. And then, going beyond it. And then avoid the following mistake, the most common mistake of investing, thinking that the investment that did good is a good investment. People rather more expensive. The things that quite often, those markets that did really, really well became more expensive. And everybody, smart money is all the time comparing them and competing. So what happens is the naive money buys the thing that was hot or is hot. The thing that has been terrible, which might be the thing that's beaten down. So I would say also an important element. Okay, so here's another one that's really important. Diversify.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right, because what I learned about this is that, first of all investments compete. And it's not easy to tell whether one investment is better than the other, because if people could do that, life would be easy and everybody'd make a ton of money. And this is a competitive game that's very difficult to compete in. So it's very difficult to say which one's better or worse. You could take experts and and do all sorts of tests, and you'll find out that they can pick that, and you can't tell whether the worst ones are going to be better. So because of that, you understand that even picking the best ones is difficult, and particularly if you're naive. Like, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars each year on research to try to give us an edge. Wow. Okay, now you've got to compete with us. So competing in the markets is more difficult than competing in the Olympics. You wouldn't go think I'm going to compete in the Olympics, but there are more people who try harder in order to do that. So it's a zero-sum game. So, but diversification, that they're different, will reduce your risk without reducing your return. Yeah. So if you know how to diversify well, so that's critical. So I would say, again, get your savings right. And the reasons I say, I would say, have great humility about what you don't know. Don't buy the thing that was hot. Don't just because you think it's hot. And then know how to diversify well. Those would be the most important things I could convey.
Your company anticipated the financial crisis, managed your clients' funds through that period. Make the argument that your culture actually has something to do with that result.
Well, first of all, I think that, I'll tell you what the moment was like. You do our calculations, and we have a view that's very different than the rest of the world's view at that time. So the independent thinking, we had among ourselves different people who had different views, and the ability to work ourselves through those was essential for us to being able to stand aside from the crowd. So I needed to have the independent thinking, and we needed to work it through. And then even at that time, we had to have the fear of being wrong, because you can never be confident that you're right in the markets. And so to place the bet, but to place the bet in a defensive way, and to work out together the engineering. What I believe is that everything happens over and over again through history. The world operates like a machine. It happens over and over again. And that if you can sort of go above yourself and your circumstances and look down at yourself within your circumstances within a historical perspective, and then have agreed upon principles. You know, principles are how to handle things that happen over and over again. By having that, it's helpful, and ours are just oriented around this idea of meritocracy, so it allowed us to have an independent point of view while being not 100% certain, and, you know, to be defensive, and it allowed us to play that well. There were three things that happened in my lifetime that are happening now that didn't happen in my lifetime before and that I needed to study. And that was an enormous amount of creation of debt and the monetization of that in a financial piece. The second is the internal conflict, populism of the right and the left, and with wealth gaps and so on, that, you know, I like to measure things, that you'd have to go back to 1900 to see those degrees of conflict, which I think are a threat to our system and a democracy and could produce a civil war type of situation. Right. And third, the rise of a great power to challenge an existing great power in the existing world order. Now, those three things in their degrees individually, but also collectively, last time they happened was 1930 to 45 period. And so what I needed to do was to understand those patterns and those things, and I took it into it. And so what I'm hoping to show is simply the mechanics of it in a lot of, and then explain why it appears that we are at an important juncture. Now, what we do at that juncture, so yes, it's measured, and there are, the United States is in relative to decline by measures, which are measured, and China has been rising, and that's an issue, but that doesn't create necessarily a destiny. It creates a situation which I hope we can
we'll go through that.
Can you go to what you're like? Can you go to your mistakes? Can you go to your weaknesses? Right? Can you go to other people's mistakes and weaknesses? Some people, because of an ego barrier, can't do that. And so if they don't recognize their own mistakes, their own weaknesses, or others' mistakes and weaknesses, what the root cause being what they're like, because of ego barriers, if they can't go there, they're going to repeat those mistakes. They're going to have them over and over again. So it's the process essentially of saying at that stage, what am I like? Everybody has strengths and everybody has weaknesses. The weaknesses are the other side of the strengths. So let's say if you're a right-brained, creative person, you may not be reliable because just the way you think necessitates you to think a certain way. That means you can't think in another way. That means you're going to keep bumping into that thing that's standing in your way. But unless you can embrace, I'm not reliable, right, and deal with it, you won't get around it. It's still going to continue to be a barrier, right? So the diagnosis to the root cause is important. So then, if you diagnose it, then you have to design what are you going to do about it that works. So let's say you are very creative but not reliable. Okay, you have to find a means of, first of all, embracing that, and then saying, if I'm not reliable, what do I do? Do I work with a reliable person? Do I learn reliability? Do I have some compensating mechanism? Because I can't let that lack of reliability stand in the way of my goal. As long as I keep doing that, I'm going to keep running into problems. So you have to design what you do about the problems. And then when you're designing what you do about the problems, then you have to follow it through. So you have to follow through or do the thing you designed. And the doing the thing you designed requires self-discipline and so on. So people have to do those things in order to be successful, right? They have to know what their goals are. They will encounter their problems. They have to diagnose those problems down to the root cause, the real root cause. They have to design ways to get around them. And then they have to have the self-discipline to follow that. And it's a continuous iterative process. So that's what we keep doing, right? So you're going in that direction. I would say that all of the shapers are doing that. They're doing that well, right? So they don't mind the problems. They don't mind that. I want to distinguish, there's big differences in opportunities.
Yes.
So let's say, supposing you have two people of comparable opportunities.
Yes.
And then they were going to do that.
Yep.
Okay. The marshmallow test, as you know, apparently, is you take a kid and you say, okay, you can have one marshmallow now, or you could have two marshmallows in 15 minutes or something.
If you don't eat the first one,
If you don't eat the first one, right?
Yep.
Okay. Once you start to realize that deferred gratification is going to make you better and so on, and you start to count and you say like something like, how many days, weeks, months, or years can I live if I don't have money come in? And you start to focus in on that. That's the first step, okay? Like the marshmallow test.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to save. You got to start there. Then if you do that, you're necessarily going to go save in what? Mm. And then you'll start to get exposure to how these things are different. Okay, then you start to care. Mm-hmm. Well, I can have one of these and one of those, and you start to experience, and then you start to learn. And basically, that's what makes the difference. You have no idea how you all see things differently. That there's a thinking spectrum. Some people are creative and not reliable. Some people are reliable and not creative. And as you start to give people personality tests like Myers-Briggs or the Big Five or different personality tests, you start to learn how people see things differently. And then when you see them differently, and that screen pops up where rather than just seeing how you see it, you go above that and you're seeing that everybody is seeing things differently. It changes how you see things because it starts to make you think, how do I know I'm not the wrong one? In other words, as you go above it and you look down on all those different ways of seeing, you start to think, how do I know I'm not the wrong one? And how do I collectively see? And you see in a color range, it's like seeing in a different color range or going from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. All of a sudden you see the full spectrum of seeing things. And then you go to the higher level, and we have systems that go through the computers that go to the higher level that say then, how do we weigh all those ways of seeing to make the best decisions? So you don't get so attached to your opinions. I think the greatest tragedy of mankind is people holding on to wrong opinions that could so easily be rectified, and that's doing them harm because they're making wrong decisions. So how do you collectively do that? Well, the answer is by everybody seeing everything and seeing how others see, they begin to gain those perspectives. They also get an appreciation for the other way of seeing. It used to be that everybody would drive each other crazy. Your brain works in one way, my brain works in another. Maybe I see big picture, you see detail. Right. Maybe I'm creative, maybe you're reliable. We drive each other crazy. When you start to realize that people are actually seeing in those ways, and that's a valid way of seeing, and that I need you and you need me, and how to put together the team, as you're asking about, it gives you the evidence base. It's okay to be different. In 1968, the Beatles went to India and they meditated, and then I heard about it, and then in 1969 in New York, you can bring some flowers and you could do that and you could learn how to meditate. And wow, I recommend, it's the best gift I could give.
You do it every day or every?
Almost, yeah. I try to do it every day. I try to do it about twice a day. And if I could take a second to describe it, what it is it frees your mind of thought. And it takes you from a conscious state into your subconscious. And your subconscious is where creativity comes from, and equanimity and all of that. Like if you're calm and great ideas come to you. And when you have that equanimity, then as you're approaching everything, things are just the way they are, and you have to deal with them. And it's a little like being, in the ninja movies, it's a little bit like being the ninja, and everything seems slower and you can handle it better. Right. And you align your subconscious, which is where the emotions and also inspirations come from, with your conscious mind. And when they're aligned and you have that equanimity, it's a great thing. If I'm making a decision, that after I make the decision usually, or right at the time, if I pause and reflect, and I write my principle down. In other words, principle is sort of a recipe. What would I use how would I make that decision? And what are the criteria around it? I find that I make it much more clear. It becomes clearer, and it applies to the next thing that comes along. It'll be that way, because everything happens over and over and over again. And I think people make the mistake of looking at just the one, like it's the first one. They have the first problem of this sort, or the first child, or whatever it is. And this has been happening plenty of times. And so if you have the principles, I found that helped me think more clearly about it. And it helped me communicate better, like why. And so over the last 30 years or so, that's what I've done. I did it originally to communicate very well with the people I work with. I set up my company, and it was very important to have good communication. And then we could debate the principles. And so that's the process. I urge people to do that. There are many excellent decision makers, and I just wish that they wrote down their principles when this sets. So, for example, we'll be talking about Henry Kissinger, and his new book is going to come out with a book on leadership. And don't just describe the leaders, describe then what about them were the essential elements to make a good leader under what circumstances. Mm-hmm. And so if we think about that, then you begin to think in a principled way. And then when you start to think in a principled way, life becomes, it's so much easier to make decisions, and it's so much less confusing, because it's like coming up on a species and you say, okay, well, what species is it? Not just it's a thing. No, what species is it? And how do I deal with that species effectively? Mm-hmm. And so that's what that is. And so I encourage people to write it down. I wish anybody who's successful wrote down their principles or their recipes for making those types of decisions. I think every place has to have a culture.
Right.
And culture is the values, what values are living out. And so, for example, the number one value is it has to make sense to you. We have to talk about it. We have to work it through in a non-egotistical kind of way. And so it's an unusual place, and it's an unusual culture.
Are you offended when people sometimes label it a cult?
I think a cult, when I think of a cult, it means believe this. And it's the opposite.
Yeah, you take it from on high.
In other words, a cult somebody's telling you believe this.
Because I said so.
And follow it.
Because I have a superior wisdom.
It's exactly the opposite of that, right? The number one principle is don't believe anything, think for yourself. And now let's go through a process of what is true together. But we can't stop that with ego. We can't let that barrier stand in our way. So we're going to live in a culture in which we can do that. Okay? Now that's the opposite of it's a belief system. In other words, I'll ask you, do you believe that we should operate this way with each other? Okay? If you want to call that a cult, I think it's the opposite of a cult. It means think, right? Speak up. Don't hide it. Don't talk behind people's backs. It's talking behind people's...
And you always make a point that you know what you don't know, and that's equally valuable.
More valuable. I want to say that, so this is the whole philosophy.
Right.
I so know that I can be wrong. Look, we all should recognize that we can be wrong. And if we recognize that we're wrong and we worry about being wrong, then what we should do is have a thoughtful dialogue.
Then you start your own company, right?
Yeah.
And it went incredibly well at the beginning.
1975. It was me, a guy I played rugby with, in my 2-bedroom apartment.
Okay, and everything went well until it didn't go well.
That's right.
And did you then have to go borrow money from your father?
Yeah, yes. So what happened was, it was a very small company, just, a handful of people. And I loved to trade the markets, and we did it for institutions. And then in 1979, 80, 81, I calculated that that the American banks had lent more money to foreign countries than the countries were going to get paid back. And I had this controversial view that the world, is going to be a big debt crisis. And Mexico defaulted in 1982. So very interesting, 1982. And when they defaulted, I got a lot of attention, and I thought we were going to have a terrible economic set of circumstances. And I could not have been more wrong. It was exactly the opposite. In August, when they defaulted and other countries started to default, it was the exact bottom in the stock market. And so I had to let off everybody, and I was down to me, and I said to myself, well, am I going to have to put on a tie and go take the train in and go to Wall Street and so on? I couldn't bring myself to do that. And I was so broke that I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad to pay the bills. And this was the best thing that ever happened to me. I mean, painful, but it was one of the best things that ever happened to me because it gave me the humility I needed to balance with my audacity. And then I needed to understand, how can I have the upside without having the downside? And then I understood the portfolio construction and risk management and so on and so forth. So that was my bottom, and that punch in the face, that experience was one of the best things that happened.
Did you pay your father back at some point?
The $4,000 plus.
He didn't want equity in Bridgewater? He didn't ask for that?
No, I think he was smarter than that. I think it's very important to know what people are like. Yet most organizations don't want to go there. By knowing what people are like and having them part of the process of knowing what they're like, there's better understanding, better communication, and also, of course, you can make better teams because nobody has all that's needed to be successful. We need each other to play different roles, and the ability to do that by knowing what people are like is enhanced. Know your goals. Know what you're going after. You could have almost anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. And so you have to prioritize, and you move in that direction. On the way to your goals, you're going to encounter your problems and your obstacles. So step 2 is understanding your problems and your obstacles, identify them. Step 3 is to diagnose them to get at the root cause of the problem. And that could be many root causes, but it could also be your weaknesses or weaknesses of others, but you have to be objective about them. Once you diagnose them, then you go to step 4, which is to design a way to get around them. And then after you have that design, you implement that design. So you have to follow through and do it. And you do that, and that will then produce its new results, which should be better results. I call this kind of the looping process. It's the evolutionary looping process. And you just keep doing that, and you learn over a period of time, and you move in the direction that you want.
Firstly, can you tell us, are you authentically satisfied and fulfilled? Do you have an experience in life of being successful?
I don't think that success is like a lot of people believe it is, and for any really successful person. I think that everybody's always struggling. And what happens is, you just struggle at a higher level. It's like learning how to ski or play some sport, and you're just kind of doing this higher thing, but it doesn't feel like that. It just feels like I'm struggling. And I think it's, and it's a good feeling. The way I think of it is, I've always thought that it's like, in order to be successful in life, you have to cross a jungle. Or you could stay on the other side of the jungle and not cross the jungle. But if you choose to cross the jungle has all sorts of things that can do you harm and bite you and everything along those lines. And so the best way to do that is to go into that with people who can see things differently and watch themselves and struggle to make it to the other side. And then what I've discovered along the way is that it's always a struggle, and I enjoy being in the jungle. I don't want to get to the underside. I don't want to get out. So that's what it feels like to me. It's the mixture of the elements that matter, right? If you have a tremendous tenacity, but you're studying, you're learning, you're trying to memorize and remember everything that you're being taught, and you're really trying hard, you could have great tenacity. You need the making sense of something. You need to embrace reality. You need these other dimensions, right? So I think the things that we started to talk about just before, the things that these people have a need for, is first they need to most fundamentally make sense of things, which is a very different kind of learning process. It's a very internalized learning process. It's not a memory-based process. So none of these people, unlike the population as a whole, none of these people have a desire to follow instructions. For most people, you go to school, they tell you what class to go to, what classes to take. This goes all the way through university. They do this to this, and then you go into the class and they say, learn this, and this is the information. And it's largely a memory-based, instructional-based process. This is not what these people do, right? This is not. So the path, what they have is a strong desire to understand and make sense of reality. How does reality work? Every time I made a mistake, they became painful mistakes, but with time, I realized that reflecting on those mistakes would give me gems. What I would do is I'd say, why did I make that mistake? And I would learn from that mistake. And I'd write down a rule. So what was helpful for me is I put that rule, I wrote these principles down. Those principles that I wrote down, I then put into algorithms, in other words, equations. And what I learned by being able to do that is if I took my decision criteria, those principles, and then I tested them back through time, I gained a perspective that was fantastic. I could test them in back 100 years. I could test them in different countries, and I would learn how those rules worked. And by putting all those rules together and then having these algorithms, the computer could replicate my thinking, but it could actually think better than I could, because what it would do is it could process more information, it could process it faster, and it could process it less emotionally. So it was like having a GPS that was next to me while I was also making my decisions, like you're driving in a car and you have both operating. And to have that next to me was, invaluable. It would learn, I would learn, and together we built that. I think the key is to think of reality as you're given. Reality is reality. And think of it as working like a machine. There are cause-effect relationships that make the realities around you. Okay, now, if you go above yourself and you look at that, how does that machine work? And then how do I interact with that machine to get what I want? And you do that with an equanimity. Meditation also helped me a lot.
Yes.
I learned to meditate many years ago. If you have equanimity and you look at it above and you look at it with curiosity, and you say, oh, I must not be interacting well with my reality, and how do I change it, and how does it work? It's a very powerful way of approaching life. So the big shift in terms of going to the notion of what do I do with my money, let's say you have a lot of liquidity, and the world has lots of liquidity. Today, the world has lots of liquidity. The question is, what are its choices? And what do those choices look like? And then you put your money. So you produce a lot of money around, a lot of liquidity, and then say, do you stop buying U.S. bonds when you have, or do you stop buying Japanese bonds when you have no interest rate and a currency risk? And so when do you stop buying? Well, it's when you have confidence in ultimately when it's driven to something else. At some point, you get a move toward inflation. If there's a move toward, like, I want to hold inflation assets, then you come into problems. Until you don't have that move to move toward inflation assets, you have a capacity for a lot of the buying there, and so the timing. That's that, the people who feel like I'm good, I've got it, won't learn. If you've got it, you won't learn, right? So you have to get rid of this ego barrier, I've got it thing. I think, first of all, one has to know their nature. You might have to discover it. But your nature means, do you have a sense of adventure? Do you seek security? Are you an extrovert, an introvert? Those types of things. So personal discovery is important. I think that who you're with and where you are is more important than what you do. Because in the early phase of that second phase, it's total discovery. So it's experimentation. You went to India for 3 years, right?
Yes.
But if you have that sense of adventure, to let go, you can discover. That's your opportunity. But discover yourself as well as to discover what the choices are like. And then as you move later into that, you'll feel the pulls. And to feel never trapped. We were talking just before we began that so many people say, I can't be that way because my job won't allow it, which is a silly concept. Because you have the freedom of those choices, even when you have constraining situations. So I think that's the life arc. Enjoy this wide open choice. You can be anywhere in the world. You can do almost anything. Let go, experiment, and then move on.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you are different. You are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. For 10 more amazing rules from Grant Cardone, check the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Saving money is only good for banks. I've been saying this to people for a decade. Saving money is basically a bank's program to keep you imprisoned to the banks. Banks don't save money. They convince the American public to save money.